traders, and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron has appointed Eric Lombard as the country's finance minister. Lombard, an experienced finance professional, will be tasked with passing a 2025 budget and lowering the deficit. Well, let's bring in Bloomberg's Claudia Cohen in Paris. Claudia, I love the fact that this came quite late in the day on December 23rd. What more do we know about Eric Lombard?
As a Christmas gift, we could say. So what we know about Eric Lombard is like it was until now the head of the state-backed financial group called La Caisse des Dépôts, which basically make long-term investment in green infrastructure, like all those important things. And Eric Lombard also was a former banker. He was a former top executive in insurance at BNP Paribas, but also at Generale. He also spent a bit of his career around the 90s as an advisor, the main advisor of former economic minister Michel Sapin, who is a socialist. So what we know about Eric Lombard is like he has a really deep financial expertise, first of all, and then listening to French political reaction yesterday evening, but also this morning, Eric Lombard is now seen as the main link between the current cabinet and the Socialist Party.
Claudia, I mean, it seems that, it's still a bit of a nightmare trying to get this budget passed, lowering the deficit, given the composition of Parliament. What is the timeline now for this new government?
So the timeline, the new cabinet will have its first meeting on January 3rd, and then on January 14th, the Prime Minister, François Bayrou, will lay out his plan in front of the National Assembly, and as soon as the 14th of January, François Bayrou could face a no-confidence vote. So even before presenting the new budget, because he's aiming to present the new budget mid-February, he could face the no-confidence vote early January.
Okay, Claudia, thank you so much for, of course, the terrific updates that we've had. Claudia Cohen there in Paris on the new government, the new finance minister, and all the challenges ahead. Now, to dive deeper into the markets, let's bring in Kit Juckes, head of FX strategy at Societe Generale. Kit, I really want to have a look at your Christmas wardrobe, because you have the most amazing shirt with holly and bells. Tell me it's not the only shirt you have that spells holidays.
No, I have others. This is just the most Christmassy that I've got.
Perfect. It's perfect for 24th of December, trying to figure out what happens in France next. How much does euro actually move on the French deficit?
It's not necessarily going to move around very much, because we're priced for massive uncertainty and weak government until we get something stable. And I'm not sure that just announcing a new guy in charge of an unruly or unrulable coalition, it makes an enormous difference. So if he can get past the confidence vote, if he can get to the point of getting a budget that might have a chance of getting through, then it is Christmas for them in that sense. But there's so much to get through for that to happen.
I mean, it feels like there's a lot to get through for Europe, right? There's the German election, which seemed very uncertainty, and then you have the added layer of the Trump presidency come January 21st.
Yeah, I think that's so. We're going to start the year with nothing but political uncertainty. And there's part of me that thinks that by definition we'll end the year with less uncertainty than we start it, just because of where we come. And we have a bias always to price in the worst of all possible worlds, and then we get surprised on the upside. But yeah, you're right. January's very difficult in terms of uncertainty. But you have to ask, how much of that's already priced into the OAT market, into the FX market. There's a fair bit in the price now.
But, Kit, I feel like the Trump rally, and I know it's mainly played out in equities and not FX, but I feel like there's more positive news than we could actually see, given the specter of inflation and what trade and tariffs could do to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we're pricing ourselves for a certain amount of negativity. I mean, the biggest challenge in that sense in the foreign exchange market is that, the US economy is the strongest economy, a lot of the politics is stronger, and the dollar in real effective terms is bouncing around, at the highest level since it was at in 1985. And it's not obvious what makes it go back down again.
But Trump, does he not want a weaker dollar?
He does, but if he's going to keep fiscal policy easy and monetary policy tight, and he's going to, come in with tariffs that the conventional response to them is to let your currency weaken against them, Yes, so I think we're going to end up with a weaker dollar, but tortuously.
Right, so up and down, especially compared to euro?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes. I mean, my problem at the moment, in a negative sense, is what happens if euro-dollar is basically trading, I don't know, 1.1067 for the next 6 months, because it's difficult to get as weak as we were in 22.
Right.
You know, we don't have that kind of crisis yet, but there's nothing to come back. So it could be, I could be just stressed out every day because it's bouncing around, because it just doesn't have the legs to get half of the euro to get up. And it's very hard to manage that kind of thing.
Kit, when you look at Europe, I mean, I hear a lot from policymakers that they have what it takes to either negotiate with Trump or retaliate. Do they?
Retaliate, I don't know in terms of things. I mean, they have a lot to negotiate because it's not in anybody's interest to have a massive trade war. I mean, you know, there's enough. We understand the history of this well enough to see that, you know, if what you wanted to do was to create a lot of jobs in manufacturing with a trade war, if that was your starting point, then the reality is manufacturing creates very few jobs in the first place. We've automated a lot of it. So, you know, if it's a political gain, this is not necessarily going to work. If what you want to do is, you know, even up America and help the sort of the middle and the forgotten part of the American population, then you have to make a lot of noise. But you don't. It doesn't necessarily turn into the far end of combative policies that we've seen.
We're going to talk about China in a second. We'll talk about the UK and also Japan. What do you think is the most interesting currency pairing right now?
The yen's the most interesting currency pairing perhaps against the euro as much as anything else, just because you know, the yen's the currency that lost its moorings and sort of set off into outer space, and it's very hard to kind of, you know, you have, when you're in outer space you can move a long way on not very much information. If you like, the atmosphere is very thin, so it makes it a very, very interesting currency to kind of figure out. Yeah. I've learnt a lot in the last year about kind of what currencies that you can't talk about valuation actually sort of feel like.
Okay, Kit, thank you so much. I'm going to get you a T-shirt, actually, with a yen, you know, outer space kind of metaphor. That's what I'm going to do. Kit Juckes from Societe Generale stays with us. We'll talk a lot more about yen. We'll also talk about China and renminbi as China mulls a record bond sale to boost the economy as Beijing prepares for more headwinds from the U.S. We'll have the details next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, China is reported to be planning to sell a record 3 trillion yuan of special treasury bonds next year to boost the slowing economy. Now, it's happening as Beijing, of course, tries to prepare for tariffs from the U.S. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden's administration is also launching an investigation into Chinese-made semiconductor chips, a sector that the U.S. says may pose a national security risk. Well, joining us now, Charlie Zhu, our Shanghai bureau chief, and Bloomberg's Jill Dices in Hong Kong. So, Charlie, what are the key takeaways from the bond sale report, and what does it say about Chinese leaders' current strategy or mindset?
Yeah, the Reuters report today, you know, is saying that China is going to issue, as you mentioned, 3 trillion yuan worth of special sovereign bonds next year, and they're going to use the proceeds mainly to drive consumption, upgrade equipment, recapitalize state banks, etc. You know, the amount is much higher than expected. The plan to increase spending for next year is not new, but you know, the amount, as I said, is surprising. But your final confirmation by the government probably won't come out until March next year, when China's legislators will meet in Beijing to approve China's, you know, fiscal budget for 2025 and next year's economic growth target. The policymakers in China, the top decision-making body known as Politburo, you know, issued a statement earlier this month that they're going to adopt a more proactive fiscal policy and also, you know, moderately loose monetary, policy as well to boost economic growth. So since then, a lot of expectation that China is going to boost, you know, deficit spending, and there's some speculation that China will increase fiscal deficit ratio to 4% of GDP next year. On top of that, China will also issue tons of special sovereign bonds as well as special local government bonds to drive infrastructure spending. The key driver of that is the uncertainties if it's facing, under a Trump presidency. Trump is threatened to increase tariffs on Chinese exports, which has been a key contributor to China's economic growth.
Charlie, very, very quickly, what other headwinds are they likely to face next year?
The other main headwinds, actually, probably if the bigger problem that China is facing is the prolonged slump in the property industry. So despite all the measures to stimulate property demand, the recovery has been slow. There have been some signs of improvement, but it's very, very moderate. The sector accounts for a huge part of China's economy. At its peak, it's accounted for 25% of GDP. And local governments rely on land sales for 40% of the income, and Chinese households, derive like 80% of their wealth, from property. So a slowdown in the sector will have profound impact on government spending and private consumption. So that's pretty, actually that's probably one of the bigger, problem China is facing. The thing is, China has built way too many houses over the years. It's sitting on way too many unsold, uncompleted houses, which take years to clear.
Charlie, thank you so much. Jill, how does the latest chips probe advance the U.S.'s efforts to curtail the Chinese chip industry?
Sure, Francine. So what the Biden administration has up to this point been spending a lot of its efforts and resources on is trying to curtail China's access to advanced chip technology, particularly when it comes to cutting-edge chips that can be used with the artificial intelligence and the like, as well as trying to bolster a lot of the U.S.'s own sort of homegrown chip ambitions. What this probe aims to do is actually target more legacy chips. So those are the kinds of things that are used in, cars, airplanes, telecommunications equipment, medical devices, that kind of stuff. So across a much wider range of different industries and such. But then I think, the other thing, and, the really important thing to kind of keep in mind here is that what this ultimately does is kind of opens the door for the Trump administration to then set in and set tariffs. Because what this probe ultimately does is it has the USTR, the United States Trade Representative, kind of take a look and sort of determine whether or not they think that China has, conducted any unfair practices related to these types of legacy chips. And then it ultimately paves the way for the incoming Trump administration to take action such as tariffs if they so choose to.
So, Jill, I guess it all depends on what Trump does in terms of policies.
Yes, that's right. I think the one thing that's really important to keep in mind here, Francine, is that both Republicans and Democrats have been fairly united in, sort of their displeasure with China when it comes to China's access to technology, these allegations of unfair trade practices, all of that kind of stuff. So it does make sense that, a incoming Trump administration might want to take a look at whatever that trade recommendation is, and then ultimately, put forth something that, does actually, require additional tariffs. Trump himself said during his campaign that he wanted to increase tariffs on China of upwards of 60%. And really, this probe, some of the provisions that the Biden administration is enacting here were used by the Trump administration to enact levies on a bunch of other different types of Chinese goods. And so it does make sense that there is sort of like a 1-2 punch that you're seeing unfold here. But of course, it'll ultimately be up to the Donald Trump administration to determine where they go forward with this kind of thing and what their strategy is ultimately when it comes to China, not just on semiconductors and advanced technology, but on everything else as well.
Jill, thank you so much. Jill Dice is there, of course, on the very latest with chips, and Charlie on the economy. Now, still with us, Kit Juckes from Societe Generale. Kit, the concern is that actually we're not 100% sure how China even recovers from this. So they're stimulating under pressure parts of the economy that they didn't really want to stimulate.
Their stimulating demand is good, but the challenge they have, permanently in China, this is an economy which, it's got a population that's not growing very fast. It's got too much housing and that they don't need and won't need, more or less. And it's had an export-led economic growth model and a housing-led economic growth model, for as long as it makes no difference to us. And so the idea that they can turn into, kind of a UK-like economy with a trade deficit and we all go out spending our money all the time, we'll see. I think, and so in that sense, maybe they're going to have some big deficits for a while just to do it. Because if they go down being the world's second biggest economy, biggest exporter, trying to grow with exports, they're going to have more friction with the United States every day.
But if you're going to have that friction, then the havens are, is yen a haven, Swiss franc?
The dollar's a haven. I mean, I think that's where the world comes down into it and says that's the one that gets the growth because it can do things. Yes, the Swiss franc's a haven, but I don't know, last time you were in Switzerland, it's right up there haven-wise. You kind of can't afford a bar of chocolate anymore. So it's already doing that job pretty well. And the yen needs to get through this problem. I mean, the Japan and the yen. Japan is what China doesn't want to have its economy end up being like.
What's the one thing that you'd sell right now?
I probably would sell the yuan. It's a very controlled currency. It's not going to move very fast, but I can't think of any single thing in all the world that might make it go up in value.
But is there an entry point?
Yeah, just not here. I mean, I think, but in the sense of, you know, if it goes a long way, they will decide they want it to come back, and it is a controlled currency. We should make no mistake about that. But to my mind, you know, they'd like it to go down a little bit. You know, what's the point of saying it? At 8, I'm pretty interested. If it goes there quickly,
right,
they'll react. But it's not the long side of any trade.
Okay, Kit, thank you so much. Kit Juckes from Societe Generale stays with us because we'll talk about the UK next. Coming up, we'll take a look back at the year that was for UK markets and the economy, and of course, what we can expect from 2025. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now still with us, Kit Juckes, head of FX strategy at Societe Generale. Kit, thank you so much for sticking around. What do you do with UK? Don't sound so beaten down.
I know.
The UK is okay.
Yeah, I mean, so the only way you trade the UK permanently, the only way you ever trade the UK is that when everyone's too negative, you'll find out it's get in.
Right.
So that's the core plan. My focus for the last sort of month or so has been trying to get really attractive levels to pay for ski holidays and things like that. I mean, you know, so and I kind of thought that the budget would give us possibly a short-term lift in demand, not so much from the budget, but from the certainly the pay rises in the public sector, and it's clear that that the budget was a bit of a disaster. You know, in terms of what it's done to output generally, as well as what it's done to employers.
So what does that mean for, if you look also at what the Bank of England can do? I mean, there's been a huge repricing of how many rate cuts they can get away with next year.
Yeah.
Was that too violent?
Well, I think we're going to get more rate cuts later. I know they have a short-term problem, but we don't have enough economic growth for them not to be cutting rates next year. So I think we'll end up having a conversation about terminal UK rates being much lower than we thought, but the journey there is tortuous.
Treacherous.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like 2025 is going to be divergence is the name of the game.
Yeah, although kind of, you know, this year's been divergent with the US powering ahead and the rest of us wallowing in the mud economically. And so, you know, I think there's room for some upside surprises at some point in the year. But what we're doing is we're starting with a series of unresolved problems. How do you get growth back on track in the UK after the budget? How do you not let fiscal policy slow growth in France? How do you not let so on? So we just need to get in the UK back to growth in a fiscally feasible way.
What's your target for sterling?
My target for sterling is probably against the euro trading in a very narrow range. Not really got down. I think we've seen the downside in euro sterling, so sterling's seen this upside. Against the dollar, I still don't think, you know, I don't think we're going to trade much above 130, and I would be very surprised if we got down to 120, because we're only going to see the pound fall a long way if it's going down with the euro. And so we don't get a big move for sterling unless we get 120 goes in euro dollar.
Kit, thank you so much. Terrific briefing ahead of the holidays from Kit Juckes, head of FX strategy at Societe Generale. Coming up, we'll have a look back at the year in the Middle East and discuss the latest geopolitics news from the region. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. Now, France's new prime minister backs a 5% deficit and names Eric Lombard as finance minister. He's now got to deliver a budget by mid-February. China reportedly plans to issue a record $410 billion worth of special treasury bonds to help boost consumption as it battles a slowing economy. Plus, European natural gas prices rise for a fourth day on persistent supply concerns, with just a week left until a key transit deal between Russia and Ukraine expires. So in the past year, while the Middle East has seen dramatic geopolitical developments, we've been following them very closely on Bloomberg, there's growing hope of a ceasefire deal in Gaza that might finally be near, perhaps coming in stages, starting with the release of humanitarian hostages. Now, here to discuss the outlook for the wider region is Bloomberg's Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Broner. Ethan, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it's been a grueling, difficult year. Is there any, ceasefire in sight?
Okay, Francine, I mean, there is certainly greater optimism about a possibility of a deal than there has been in more than a year. There remain lots of details to get through. I think that right now the issue is which Palestinian prisoners will be released. Of course, the Israelis want to prevent those with so-called blood on their hand from going, where they would go when they're free, which hostages would get freed in the first part of it. And then there are a series of other issues about how exactly Israeli troops are going to pull back from certain areas and how Palestinians returning to their homes in northern Gaza will be monitored. So there's still a bunch of stuff going on, but they are talking about it. So there is a sense of progress.
Yeah. Ethan, let me also bring in, of course, our Golnar Montevali, who's been following this very closely as well. Golnar, what happens next? So there's a lot of focus on what's happening in Syria. You have Israel and Turkey shaping up some of these borders. What are you focused on?
So I'm obviously mostly focused on Iran, but Iran's obviously played quite a substantial role in this conflict, given its support for Hezbollah and Hamas, and obviously its very close relationship with the Assad regime in Syria. So I think it's going to be interesting to see in the year ahead how Iran copes with what's happened over the past year, particularly the effective defenestration of Hezbollah by Israel and the effective unraveling of a foreign and regional policy that's kind of defined the country for decades now. So it's going to be interesting to see how Iran tries to rebuild that policy, which it's vowed to do, and balance that aim with the incoming Trump administration, which Iran really wants to try and, I guess, take a different approach to this time around compared to when he was first in office.
Golnar, how should we view the Iranian elections?
So the Iranian elections were, I think, pretty fascinating. I think it's the first time that Iran had an election that was unscheduled in that way. Obviously, it happened. It was a snap election because of Ibrahim Raisi's death, very sudden killing in a helicopter crash. So it was kind of unprecedented for the country. In a way, it gave the system, the overarching regime that's ruled by Supreme Leader Khamenei, to kind of clear the slates, if you like, and bring in a reformist president whom I think he hopes will kind of quell some of that real internal dissent and unpopularity that he faces, and that is a real risk to his leadership.
Ethan, I guess for 2025, what does it mean for Benjamin Netanyahu? Does he get emboldened by the Trump policies?
There's no doubt that he's emboldened by the arrival of Trump in office. I think that, of course, Trump is a great mystery man. That's both his strength and, it's hard to know what he wants and what he's going to do. But certainly those around Netanyahu have been going to talk in these weeks to those around Trump to talk about a joint policy against Iran. What that means, it's from one extreme, which is an American-led attack on Iran, military attack, to possibly providing the tools to Israel for that attack, 2, 3, simply a so-called maximum pressure on Iran. So, it'll be interesting to see whether, as Goldner notes, that the Iranians would like to have something less than an attack underway. They'd like to have relations. And, it doesn't seem like that either Netanyahu or Trump believes that's what should come, but we really don't know yet.
Mm-hmm. Ethan, what do we know about, I guess, the Islamist rebels that are now in charge of Syria?
Well, we don't really know. I mean, what we do know is that Western diplomats, including American diplomats, have been meeting with them and come out saying that that these leaders are making the right noises and saying the right things, but that it's going to have to be judged based on deeds. I think, if you spent your entire life in an Islamist movement, the notion of sort of a secular democracy is still kind of a foreign concept to you. It doesn't mean that it couldn't possibly happen, but it does mean, as we saw in the beginning of the Arab Spring, when Islamists took power in a lot of places, that it's a very different game from what we think of as democracy. And, we'll have to see what that means. And also, what does it mean for Israel in terms of the Kurds and the Druze that they're most worried about?
Goldner, I mean, we also understand Iran is actually discussing some nuclear issues with, I think, Europe ahead of the Trump inauguration. Do we know how Donald Trump will deal with Iran?
We don't. I mean, we know that Iran has been looking to find a way, an entry point into reviving nuclear negotiations with the US. And they tried to do that at the UN General Assembly in New York earlier this year. That was one of their aims. And it seems that they clearly want to have this meeting with the E3, that's Britain, Germany and France, ahead of Trump's inauguration, so that they can set some terms, I think, and just maybe get a sense via the Europeans of what to expect and how to handle Trump this time around. I think what's very clear, and as Ethan just mentioned, is that the Iranians want some kind of channel to the Trump administration. I think the focus that the Iranians are going to have is on his pragmatism, because they see themselves as a very pragmatic actor in the Middle East. That's how they look at themselves. And they will try and appeal to that side of Trump as much as they can, because they are in desperate need of foreign investment in their infrastructure at the moment. And that will only happen once they get some real, credible sanctions removal or easing on those sanctions.
Ethan, what can we also expect from Russia in all of this? A lot of people were surprised by the fact that, so they took Bashar al-Assad in, but they didn't really get involved in Syria, probably because Putin is weakened, probably because he doesn't have the bandwidth. Is that being talked about in the Middle East? Does that change anything?
Were you addressing the question to me? I'm sorry. My sense, by the way, is that it's what we can't tell about the Trump administration is how hawkish it's going to be. I think that's the hardest thing. There are those around him and those in Israel who are trying to advise him to say the United States needs to reestablish its deterrence in the world against China and Russia and the China, Russia, North Korea, Iran alliance that we've seen develop, and that the simplest way to do it would be to join with Israel against Iran now. I have no idea if that is falling on fertile ground in the incoming Trump administration, but I do know it's being discussed, and the notion of pushing Russia back through dealing with Iran is certainly being talked about.
Thank you so much. So interesting. Bloomberg's Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Broner and Bloomberg's Iran reporter Golnar Motavalli. I know these two will have a lot of work also in 2025. Coming up, our focus turns back to the UK. What's in store for the housing market in 2025? We'll discuss that next. And this is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Now, European natural gas prices have climbed for a fourth day on persistent supply concerns, with just a week left until a key transit deal between Russia and Ukraine expires. Now, prices rose as much as 3.4% yesterday, following a 7% jump last week. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Priscilla Azevedo-Rocha. Priscilla, thank you so much for all of your outstanding work on this. What are the chances of the transit deal actually being extended?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. So the chances of the transit deal getting extended right now are very slim. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all the biggest Wall Street strategists, they have considered a no-deal scenario for next year when they look at Europe's balance of supplies, about like the gas we're going to have available next year. And it's very, very difficult to get this deal over the line because it has become a matter of politics. It involves a lot of political will between Russia and Ukraine as both countries enter the third year of war.
So how serious, Priscilla, is a blow would the loss of this transit deal be for some European nations?
It depends on who you're talking about. So Europe right now receives about 15% of its supplies from Russia. And the countries in Eastern Europe, such as Slovakia and Czech Republic, that directly get the supplies from Russia through Ukraine, they account for only 5%. But the biggest problem is that the end of this transit agreement comes at a time when the weather is turning cold, when Europe is yet not getting all the LNG that it's supposed to get from the US, from Qatar, and the new contract. So it comes at a very tricky time from the region where we still don't have enough supplies of energies coming from abroad.
So, Priscilla, what are the alternatives to Russian fuel via Ukraine?
So right now, those countries such as Slovakia, Czech Republic, which are lobbying to continue with this agreement, they have to look elsewhere, right? They have to look at Germany because they're landlocked, so they don't have access to seaborne supplies like other countries. So it would be getting LNG from Germany, it would be exporting from neighboring countries and so on. So the situation for them might be very, very tight this winter.
Priscilla, thank you so much. Priscilla Azevedo-Rocha there with the very latest on this gas transit deal. Now, the bond sell-off triggered by the UK autumn budget has tempered the outlook for the housing market. Bloomberg Economics is now forecasting that house prices will rise 4% by the end of next year. But the pace of growth is expected to be bumpy. Let's get more now with Neeraj Shah from Bloomberg Economics. Neeraj, I'm so happy you came on because we started all of our holiday preparing, and it always ends up talking about the housing market in the UK, especially in London, with family members. So a lot of people now can go back home and be smarter about this. How did the housing market perform in 2024, and what are you expecting for next year?
Well, it's actually been quite remarkably resilient this year, considering we had a stretched affordability. And I remember coming onto your show at the start of this year, and we had data coming out showing a recession in 2023, and we were talking about a potential crash. And here we are at the end of the year, where prices have increased potentially about 4%. And it's largely due to mortgage rates falling and people earning more than inflation. And those are the key reasons why prices have been rising this year. And we're expecting that to continue next year with mortgage rates falling again and expecting 4% growth next year. However, I would caveat this because the Bank of England is likely to cut rates by less than the Federal Reserve or the ECB. And these gradual cuts mean affordability will be stretched for longer. We were expecting the long-term average in affordability to be met this year, but it's now going to be 1 year later. So people are still going to be stretched. The thing about one thing to also remember is stamp duty.
Right.
So people will want to avoid paying more stamp duty from April. And so there's likely to be a rush beforehand. And that's where we're talking about a bumpy ride next year.
So, Neeraj, where are mortgage rates headed? We've seen, as you mentioned, this repricing, right, of how many cuts the Bank of England can do next year.
It's quite fascinating, isn't it? At the start of this year, the markets were expecting 6 rate cuts. In the end, we got 2 cuts. Next year, we're expecting 4 rate cuts. The markets are expecting less, about 3. So, but at ballpark figure, rates should be at 3.75% by the end of next year. Again, we were expecting that by this year. And again, I'm repeating this, but it's shown resilience despite that.
Interest rates are still quite high. So what does it mean for first-time buyers?
So this is a double whammy for first-time buyers. So on the one hand, they're facing increasing rents, at record rents in London, above 11%. So that makes it much more difficult to save for a deposit. And at the same time, you have mortgage rates still very elevated. So it's a real challenge for them. And the other whammy, or adding salt to the wound, if you like, is essentially from April, they're the ones who are going to face the biggest rise in stamp duty increases. And so there's this incentive for them to act now, but it's going to be tough.
Niraj, I mean, the government has also set this target of building 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years. It seems huge. It's a huge number. Can they actually achieve it?
So many governments in the past have tried and failed. And I think we have to look back at how things have happened in the past. And if you look back, you have to go back to the 70s so you have to basically build more than 300,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And it was in the 70s where you got to 250,000. So even that was less. So it's a big challenge, and a big challenge because, one, we have planning restrictions still, and even though the government has talked about loosening these, it's still going to be a big ordeal to get through that. But also, we don't have capacity in terms of labour and so on. So it's going to be a big challenge to meet.
Niraj, thank you so much for joining us. Niraj Shah there from Bloomberg Economics. Now, coming up, what's the food forecast for 2025? We'll discuss the mouth-watering restaurant trends coming to tables in the new year. That's next. And this is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now we're, of course, approaching a new year, and with it comes new trends. So what's the food forecast for 2025? Well, joining us now to tickle those taste buds is Kate Crater of Bloomberg Pursuits. First of all, Kate, I love your columns, and they've just given me so much joy this year, because in a year where it's quite difficult to kind of, do all the geopolitics, it's just a nice break from all the serious news out there. Not that it's not serious news. So 6 mouth-watering trends coming to your restaurant table in 2025. I mean, some of them are like wild, and some of them are imported from the U.S.
Exactly. I mean, so much stuff is happening here as well. But if there's like one food forecast, I would say it's peppercorns. Like, it's just rolling. It's a wave. It's taking over every restaurant, every city. You'll see it. Like, chefs are going crazy doing au poivre treatments on everything beyond steak, and there's even martinis now in New York City at a place called Le Roc, where they have a peppercorn au poivre martini. So
I love that. Health benefits?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I think you can play it as you want to, of course, like a fresh, spicy, fruity hit, that doesn't have any, added fat. So there you go.
There you go. I mean, it's amazing how these trends, where do these trends come from? I know, you were also telling me Jane Goodall is selling something like with poivre to give back to the gorillas.
Exactly.
It explodes, right?
Oh my God, exactly, Francine. There's one of the preeminent peppercorn purveyors. Whoops, I won't say that again. In the U.S. based is Burlap and Barrel, and the guy who owns it, Ethan Frisch, travels around the world sourcing peppercorns. So he's seen huge growth in what he's buying. He said it's up 300% the amount of peppercorns he's buying and selling in the last 2 years, and he forecasts even more for 2025. But another product that he's working on is he's partnered with Jane Goodall to sell honey made out of Tanzania, and that benefits the gorillas that she's so passionate about. So it's nice to think about spices and products doing good, helping the world.
Okay, hand rolls, that's another big trend.
Hand rolls, yeah. You know what? That's another thing. That Japanese, they're also called tamaki, and that's very big in the U.S., but there's actually a place here in London that opened in the last couple months called Tamaki that's been hugely popular, so you'll see more and more of them. And those are places, they're hand rolls, so they're made with nori, and then you put some nice sushi rice on top, and then almost any kind of fish you can think of. Some people even put steak. Maybe you'll see an au poivre hand roll before you know it to bring it all together for me. But it's really great because sushi has gotten super expensive. I mean, it's crazy in New York, but even here, you can spend £300 eating an omakase meal. And so a hand roll is just a lower entry point, and you just eat it with your hand. You don't have to worry about chopsticks, and it's great. It's a fantastic trend.
I love that. So the other thing, so I'm looking at your wonderful story with like a picture of a pizza with broccoli. My Italian genes are kind of, but at the same time, this is like, slices of pizza carrying new responsibilities.
Exactly. I know. I feel like I'm offending you, so maybe I should talk quickly. But there's a huge sort of fusion. Fusion's a bit of a dirty word still in the culinary world, because it's such a, it feels like you're bastardizing a kind of food. But in fact, there's these really terrific, like, chicken tikka masala pizzas that are coming out. And these chefs who are really good at making a pie and know how to make dough are topping it with stuff like buttered chicken. And you know what? It's delicious. I know I might be offending you, but it's just delicious, marrying these two, like, popular foods together.
I mean, I was also told the best pizzas in Japan. I'm still recovering from that. So
I mean, you know what? Yes. Yeah. It's really good.
If Kate said it, it's true. Kate, let me also talk to you about Lego trends. So
I love it.
This is quite fun because actually ASML, let's get to that story because it's quite a quite amazing story. So when you look at ASML, first of all, check out Dine Go on the Bloomberg terminal for the best places. But ASML has created what may be one of the most coveted items for technology fans this Christmas. For 208 euros, so it's not cheap, employees of the Dutch chip-making machine firm can buy a Lego-style miniature of a lithography machine. Listen to this from the company's website. Now, the model is called TwinScan EXE5000, and it was created to celebrate ASML's 40th anniversary. I mean, we could do that with food, Kate.
Let's do it with hand rolls. You know what? You can make one. You can make a hand roll, put any fish on top of it. Let's go, Lego.
I love that. What's your must-go restaurant for 2025 in London?
You know what, Carbone? I'm a big Carbone fan from New York, and they are coming here to London probably in the summer. They're going to be at the new Rosewood Hotel, and so get ready for that.
Yeah, and it's like maximalist, right? It's like Venetian palace vibes with like Muranos everywhere. So
let's go.
Something to cheer us up. Bloomberg's Kate Crater, thank you so much. Again, just go to Dine Go on the Bloomberg terminal. It's really fun. The best places to wine and dine around the world. Now, just before we go, of course, we'd like to wish you a very happy holidays from all of us. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, Danny Berger here in London, and this is Bloomberg.